Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and kick us off. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this turnout. The reason I wanted to host a webinar in partnership right now is because we're all experiencing a lot of turbulence, a lot of uncertainty, across sectors, across institutions, and resilience is a really high priority for everyone that we know that's doing mission-driven work right now. And our experience is that partnership is really key to that resilience, and leaning into our communities and our relationships is also really key to getting through these times. So just appreciate you joining us for this. Just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. I want to talk a little bit about why partnership matters. What's its value? What are the impacts? And then pretty quickly, we'll move into our panel discussion about making your partnerships as effective as they can be. What are those key ingredients to getting the most out of these investments in your relationships, which take a lot of time and effort? Um, We'll leave plenty of room for audience Q&A, so do put those questions into that Q&A function. Grace, we have my colleague Grace is here. I'm going to ask her to be scanning the chat to remind people if they're putting questions in there. Go ahead and move them over to the Q&A. And then we'll close. Just a little bit of background. I'm Stephanie Karp. I'm a managing director at Petrero Group. We work across the country providing leadership consulting to nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. We help with strategic planning, facilitation. We do executive recruitment and board recruitment. I have a background personally in public-private partnerships, specifically philanthropic partners to public lands, and also coalitions that bring the outdoors, public lands together with public health. That's my background. But I've moved into consulting in the broader nonprofit space. And as I've worked with more education organizations, more public media, other health organizations, I'm finding a lot of the same underlying principles to partnership apply across these fields. And they apply across different kinds of relationships too, with funders, with corporations, with peers, with academics. And our experience, my experience, uh, and in a firm that's worked with hundreds of nonprofits, is that these partnerships really contribute to resilience. They increase resilience. They allow folks to come together, align their efforts, pool their resources toward mutual goals, and they're kind of sustaining these channels that allow resources to move where they're going to be most effectively deployed, right? And so over time, if you're working toward a same long-term goal, this kind of nimbleness, this flexibility allows progress to continue, even if any one organization, if any one sector, any one source of funding is challenged. So at the systems level, I think partnerships are really important. I think they're going to get us through these really challenging times. Why are they important to your organization as you lead your nonprofit? I don't think I have to convince anybody in this audience about partnerships, but just for the sake of getting some shared vocabulary, they deepen impact. So when you're approaching a problem that, the solution is going to be multi-pronged, you need to work with other actors. It's sort of the only way to make progress on these big kind of challenging issues. They increase effectiveness. I mean, intuitively, when we pool resources and expertise, it's efficient. But I think even more than efficiency, when you pool resources, I also mean you're pooling ideas, strategy, innovation. The organizations that are good at partnership tend to thrive in moments like these ones. And the ones that kind of go inward, they struggle. With limited perspective, you have a harder time, you know, doing effective strategic thinking. You have a harder time making your case. At times like these, if you're too inwardly focused, you can kind of lose relevance. Your peers will move past you when things are changing really fast. So it's key to stay open, to connect with your peers, to be doing collaborative work when things are changing. Partnership can also be a really effective way to try out a new strategy without overhauling your operation or kind of stepping into an area where you have less competency, right? So these are stats that I pulled from the latest BDO nonprofit benchmarking survey. They've been doing this for about 9 years straight. It's a survey of about 250 plus organizations meant to kind of take a broad snapshot of the nonprofit sector. So 80% of organizations this year, this came out earlier this month, 80% of organizations say they've been impacted by changes at the federal level. More than half intend to enter into strategic partnerships, in response. Almost 90% plan to meaningfully expand or shift the scope of their mission, like really change what they're doing, change their approaches. And like I said, this is risky. And if there are other actors in your space who can help you do that, where maybe, the partnership allows you to adapt and change your approach to expand what you're doing, you're also helping them to approach things in a new way. There's some mutual benefit there. I love this finding. So I pulled this from a study of one individual conservation collaboration. It is a multi-agency lands management collaboration in the Bay Area. These researchers looked really deeply into this collaborative and found a lot of impacts. One of them that was really significant was just how kind of engaged, confident, morale building the partnership was for the members of this collaborative. It's hard to kind of overstate or understate. People want to be connected. They want to build trust. They want to feel like they're part of something. That's a really important reason to collaborate as well. And then, lest we forget, partnership isn't all about you and your organization. You're providing value to your partner. I think it can be really helpful to be really clear about the value propositions that you bring to a partnership, and what your partner is bringing to you, because it helps everyone get really excited about it. But it also clarifies what your strengths are, what your respective strengths are as you're, establishing your roles and responsibilities. This is a resource we put together kind of specifically for public-private partnerships, but I think it applies more broadly as well. And I'll share this in the previous study at the end of the webinar too. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we get all of these benefits? Partnerships are a huge investment in time and resources. They take relationship development, they take time, they take almost continuous communication. So it's really important that your partnerships are providing value in excess of all that effort. So how do you engage in partnerships effectively so that happens? And how can you as leaders support that happening with structures, practices, cultural norms at your organization? To answer this question, I brought two of my colleagues who've really dedicated their career to this question. We have Jason Morris. He's Environment and Climate Lead at Pisces Foundation, where he focuses on collaborations, building the collaborations and capacity that are necessary to strengthen the environmental movement. Jason has a deep background in movement building and collaborative action for change, including his time as the board chair of the Blue Sky Funders Forum and as the co-founder of ChangeScale. Sarah Unz is the Senior Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at the National Park Foundation, where she guides NPF's work in building strategic partnerships and strengthening the partnership community by advancing innovation, collaboration, and inclusion for the benefit of all parks. Let's start with Sarah. First, I just want you to just kind of introduce us to your experience leading partnerships. And if you could, speak a little bit to why, as a talented, capable leader with a time-bound life, you've dedicated your career to focus on partnership.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. And hi, everybody. Really great to be here and be part of, this crew of folks who thinks partnerships is worthy of our time and our resources. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm Senior Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at the National Park Foundation. And what that really means is that I get to help NPF drive its impact. So our philanthropy team gets to raise the money and I get to spend it. But more importantly, we get to spend it in really meaningful ways through partnership with the National Park Service, but also through partnership with many, many, many different types of nonprofit organizations on the ground in parks, doing local work every day. So Stephanie, you asked why, why this in my one wild and beautiful life? Is this what I want to put my focus on? And I think it comes down to a couple of things. It's fun. It really is fun. And I picked this career, this kind of parks and partnerships, for a reason. I wanted that to be my focus. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to be part of something that, frankly, wasn't working in an emergency room or wasn't doing some of those other types of things. I wanted to do this. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives, perhaps when they're looking to thrive. And I think the other thing that really drives me to this is you might be able to do things alone, but oftentimes it's better when you do it with other people. For myself personally, I work best in collaboration with others where I can learn and iterate and take in multiple perspectives, I find that when you do that, the solutions you create are far more accurate and meaningful, and they're easier to come by. I struggle less when I've got a great group of people around me who are part of the solution building. And I think networks, but more accurately for this conversation, community is really critical to just getting things done and getting things done with the most impact on those within the community that you wish to serve.
Thanks, Sarah. And Jason, why don't you do the same? Introduce yourself a little bit, talk about kind of your experience with partnerships, but also why? Why partnerships?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Happy Wednesday, I think it is. Coming from beautiful downtown San Francisco this afternoon. And I want to start with a word that Sarah just said, which is more fun. Doing these things alone, it's not so fun. Working on some challenging things together, certainly puts wind underneath my wings and a lift in my step. The on the why part, it really kind of comes back to the work that we're engaged in here at the foundation. As Stephanie said, I lead the environment and climate work at the Pisces Foundation. We're largely focused on building and strengthening the movement to have more power and influence to get things done in a way that adds to the durability of them. The movements have been effective at getting things done, but as we're seeing really every day, things can be unraveled pretty quickly if they don't have a broad base of support. And so thinking about like how do you get to breadth and depth at the same time, it's really hard to do alone. It's hard for any one organization to do alone. It's hard for any one grant to make that kind of change, one foundation, one person. The idea of finding and identifying your unique value inside of an ecosystem and contributing that value alongside your colleagues really ladders up to in a way that the whole's greater than the sum of the parts. And I know that's kind of cliche to say, but it's actually true in this context that uh, big changes don't often happen by independent interventions. And so as we think about the challenges that we face today, the challenges that I think a lot about in water work in the United States or in super pollutant work, those nasty little pollutants that do a lot of damage up in our climate and warm our planet, it's nearly impossible to tackle those things by themselves. And so working at a systems level and working with people next to you on the left and to the right really helps ladder up the impact. Going way back for me, the why really started with thinking deeply and learning about how kids learn about the environment. At the time, I was really focused on making the most awesome experience that a kid could have fit into a week in a national park, and that was amazing. And in fact, those things are called peak experiences. But as I really more deeply understood how affinity grows in a human, it's clear that it grows over time. And you have these experiences, sure, but those experiences, when they add up, are much more powerful than they are independently of themselves. And so, at a certain level, I felt like there was a moral obligation to know what the kids were going to do after they left the national park and try to scaffold into that, and then to know what they were going to do before they came to the national park so we could build on that. So starting to think about more holistically about how change happens, about how systems can be moved, it's very quickly understood that it can't happen alone. And so digging in on the partnerships is certainly what we're thinking a lot about and why we're all here today.
Well, as two people who have thought about this a lot, let's start with the one big question. What are some things that are kind of essential for a successful partnership? Things that kind of need to be put in place right from the start. Either of you.
Yeah, you're gonna have to call on one of us. We can't poke each other.
That's fair. Jason, you're up. Why don't you start? Throw one out.
I mean, I'll start with the human nature of the thing, relationships. It's really challenging, if not impossible, to collaborate and be in deep partnership with somebody if you don't have a relationship with them. And relationships are on a spectrum, right? That doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but it does mean you have to deeply understand where a person is coming from and what their interest is, and be in a position to share that piece of yourself too. So you can think about where the relationship nests with each other and can move forward. That relationship building is rife with a lot of challenges, right? There's politics, there's different lived and learned experiences, there's power dynamics, but often if you can convene, connect, build relationships, you can start to build trust. And once you trust each other, you can start to do something together. Without that trust, it's really challenging to do something together that is really whole with your whole being, as opposed to just on the margins of your work. And so that I'll just start with relationships and trust. We can go deeper in a little
Yeah. Sarah, do you want to build on that?
Sure. I'll tell you a little story.
bit.
When I first was not green in my career, but maybe a lighter shade of green in my career, I realized pretty quickly that partnerships was one, something I enjoyed, and something that was critical to get work done. But what I didn't do well was kind of a bit of what Jason just mentioned. Was I was expecting a lot from the people I was partnering with, meaning they would tell me, they would bear their truths, but I would keep a lot to myself. And I remember getting some feedback from an advisory organization that worked with me that said, we really like you, Sarah, but we don't know you. Like, tell us more. Like, we have to tell you so much, but you don't tell us enough. And I think it speaks to what Jason was saying about power dynamics, about trust, about I think the give and take in which partnerships thrive on. And I think in that moment, I learned pretty quickly that to move this relationship forward, I needed to be a bit more forthcoming about what it was that I wanted what I was hopeful for in terms of the partnership. And I think that will speak to kind of this deeper take that we can have on this. There's some tactics here. There's beginning with that relationship building, that trust building, but what is the clear framework for partnership? What are the actual things that we will be doing together that we both know about? Regular meetings, determining where the vision and strategy is. Where do our goals overlap? How are we both committed to putting time into this relationship? I think about executive directors, CEOs at organizations that support parks across our country. And the ones that really nail this are the ones who build a relationship day by day, meeting by meeting with their National Park Service colleagues, with local businesses, with their boards, with whomever it is that they're surrounded by in their local community to create a thriving organization. And then there's the opposite of that, ones where there isn't that transparency, where there's a lot of maybe ego involved and a lot less humility at the beginning of that relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things you bring up that is coming to mind for me is the importance of having building partnerships at all levels of an organization, right? Not just at the top. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. One of the things that I think is demonstrates a lot of the success that NPF has seen, in particularly partnerships with nonprofit organizations that support parks, is sure, you can have a lovely relationship with that executive director or the CEO of that partner group, and a lot can happen at the top. But what I found is that when my team has relationships with an executive director's team, and we have a way to communicate outside of the CEO or myself, they can get a lot done. You know, as leaders, oftentimes we're in the clouds, we're thinking about strategy, we're doing all these big picture things, and our teams just need an answer, or they just are looking for a piece of information, if only they could just talk to. And I think having those open relationships with a program staff at a partner organization with your own team, ooh, that has really changed the game for us at NPF to be able to do our work, but to also develop those relationships up and down the chain. So when maybe that executive director leaves, maybe there's a change in staff, maybe there's some succession planning happening, those relationships stay solid regardless of who is in place, because we have built relationships not dependent on one person.
One of the things we talked about in preparing for this conversation is, there's a lot of advice out there to have really clearly defined shared goals. But I think what we forget is that that's really different from having a predetermined outcome. Can you talk a little bit more about Sarah coming to the table, kind of open-minded about what the partnership can look like?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'll tell you another little story. So I think one of the things that, and Jason, please chime in, because I think when we were preparing for this call, I think you +1 this one. NPF has done a really tremendous job of, I think, building the portfolio of work that we've done to support partners across the nation. However, we didn't always get it right. You know, I think sometimes we thought we knew better than what the partner actually needed. And we did a lot of decision making without them at the table, using a few pieces of information that we had, but perhaps having folks at the table creating this with us and creating it with their own boards and their own staff, perhaps that would have been a different and more productive strategy than just making some high-level decisions. So I think that that is one way in which we've iterated and learned throughout the years that, sure, as a national level funder, we have a very unique vantage point to see what many organizations are doing, and we can identify themes and trends, but by no means do I work in a park. Do I work on the ground every day doing the work that those partners do? And it was very humbling to recognize that perhaps we didn't get it right. And when you can come to the table with low ego, a lot of flexibility, some humor, and some enjoyment for the work, and a determination to have joint successful outcomes and not a predetermined one, we really changed the game on how we partner with people. And I would include Pisces in that partnership, how we partner with them. But Jason, what do you think?
I mean, I love that, especially because you've included Pisces at the end. But this notion of like code generation, I think is really hard. It starts with the premise that we've both, before we even come to the conversation, thought deeply about the challenges that we're going to talk about. And often, because of dynamics or ego or whatever it may be, you come with a preconceived notion about what the solution is to that. And that's not code generation. That's co-opting somebody else to your position. And so being able to I said it earlier, but it's honor and value someone's perspective, someone's lived and learned experience about the challenges that they're facing, and then talk about what could be done about that together, and bend often from your preconceived perception into what the actual work will be. That's actually really challenging, and it takes time, and it takes openness, and it takes empathy, and we're busy people, right? Like all of us, everybody on this screen. And so like having the patience to go through that process often gets skipped. We want to just go right to the work and get right to the results. But without the process on the front end, you can't actually have a code generated result. And so that, again, trust to like do that, but patience to be a part of it. And funder dynamics, I think, are the worst at that part, of the patients where, you know, we've perceived to have a solution set, and we're just looking out for someone who says, I want to do that thing, which is very different than showing up at a table and entering into a conversation about what might be if we thought about this together and we thought about our various roles. So we have a role as a funder. One of those is to put money in. The other one is to put perspective in, not the perspective, but a perspective. And that's quite different. And then to listen and see if we can come up with an aligned way to approach a challenge where everybody feels like and actually is a part of the solution. When that dynamic gets yielded, those who have the resources versus those who are seeking the resources gets yielded from a power position, you may get incremental change. You often will just get some throughputs and some boxes checked. And what we're talking about, you know, certainly if we're talking about in the parks context, we're talking about the affinity for the natural world. And the affinity for the natural world is a complex thing. It's a complex thing at an individual human level. It's a complex thing at a society level. You can see when entire groups of people, entire countries, and entire states embrace these ideals. That didn't happen overnight. It took long, hard work. It took narrative. It took shared data. It takes shared activities and aligned work to get those outcomes that are actually collective and they're actually durable. And so when we skip over the part of process and the part of openness and listening, we skip over actual true change and the complexity of a change process, which often happens longer than one grant cycle, often happens, doesn't actually get to be articulated on a grant proposal, which means you need to be in relationship with your grantees over time, not just at a 6-month mark when you get to have a meeting and then at a 12-month mark when you get to read a report. It means being embedded in the work. Now the challenge, right, is like supply and demand on one sense. So how, you know, like we have to figure out how to get around that. And we do have to make decisions in order to narrow that spectrum. We often do that, hopefully, in partnership with those who are doing the work. So if we want to change affinity over on certain people's views on the National Park Service, then we would talk to those people and listen to their ideas for how to do that, and then start to surface some proposals for how to go about the work. That's very different than I'll tell one of, or I'll take Sarah's strategy and tell a story where I was asked to talk to a group of, I guess, master's degree level future park professionals at UC Berkeley across the bay there. And one of the questions was, what would make the strongest proposal for how to build a new park? And as if I knew the answer to that. Like that was the question. And I was like, wait a minute, you all are here in graduate school at one of the world's premier universities learning about what it would take to make a great national park or a great park. I'm not the one to answer that. The question that I have for you is, why would you be able to do that? Not like, do you have the best idea or not about what makes a good park? Like, how can you actually impact the change process? The change process is much more challenging, I think, than answering what makes a good park. There's a ton of data about what makes a good park. There's very little data on the change process that it takes to convince people to exert influence and to find the common values that people share and then build a vision around those values. And then you can put in all the cool elements that make parks. But, you know, like us being leaned on for like what makes a great park, it's got to go the other way. We have to be open about honoring and valuing the expertise where it is, and then asking questions about, you know, how that vision will come to life as opposed to what the vision is.
I'd love to ask either of you, maybe we'll start with Jason though. What are some it's a process to put together this roadmap for change with another organization to bring all of your goals and values and strategic thinking to light. What have you seen work in terms of putting some infrastructure in place to get that to take place?
Yeah, thank you.
And if you can give some examples, it'd be great.
Yeah, like, well, what is infrastructure? I've said a couple of those things. Well, what we know from research, from observing powerful, durable movements, is that movements often have support systems built into them that help the facilitation of knowledge, the facilitation of relationship building, shared learning, which is incredibly important in a partnership, and co-generating solutions and then uh, collaborating to get those things done. So an example of that is there, does shared data exist? Are we all working from the same body of data through which we use to inform our practices and our decisions? That's really important. If I have proprietary data and you're my partner and you don't get to see it, that's not really helpful in terms of code generation. So are there mechanisms for data, or does every organization have their own data? I'll go back to that example I gave a little while ago when I was thinking about kids and how they learn and spending time in national parks. How would I know what another kid did after they spent a week in the national park unless the organization that they went to next was willing to share that with me and I was willing to share that with them? That is an example of data that is not shared. Client lists. And the reason it's not shared is actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like if those are my clients and those are your clients. And so why would we share them? But then we end up with the same fourth graders having the same experiences in the same parks and a ton of fourth graders not having any experiences in those parks. So like the ability to like open yourself up in a way that's trust based. Again, you'd have to trust your partner to do this for the sake of a collaboration being effective. You need shared data. So that's an example of that. You also need a place to convene and connect and build relationships that's not uh, laden with like crazy dynamics that we've been talking about. So what are those places? Who are the organizations who pull together the conferences, the convenings? Who are the ones who find and surface those shared interests among a certain group of stakeholders? And how do those interests like get worked on collectively? Well, those things, there's names for them. They're trade groups, they're alliances, they're backbone organizations, they're intermediaries. There's all these different names for them. Very few of them deliver actual program on the ground to people. They often deliver value to other actors in the ecosystem that they're working in. Usually direct service providers. Direct service providers get to be a part of a trade group or an association, and that's a place where you can actually show up and build relationship with people. Once you have that, then you can start to think about the highest common denominator or a bigger idea that no organization, no individual can do themselves, that only is possible through collaboration and partnership. Otherwise, it's just going to fall to the lowest common denominator, which is what do we all have in common, right? And so, well, we all have risk management in common. Well, that's really important. We should learn about risk management and keep our kids safe. But that's not necessarily going to transcend a system and be able to pull a collaboration together. So when we have this, because we refer to national parks a lot in this group, if I don't know, Sarah, how many are there? 426 plus or minus in
Parts,
national park units in the world.
a few more,
In
but yeah,
in a very they play out in a very place-based world, place-based way, right? They are physically in places, most of them, 99% of them. How do you speak in one voice for the role that education plays in those parks? How do you speak in one voice for the role that volunteerism plays in those parks? When the decisions are made often in Washington, D.C.
This is a great segue to ask Sarah to explain what the Friends Alliance is. Explain um, what bringing together all of these actors has been able to do for not for parks, and why National Park Foundation decided to invest in this alliance.
Mhm. Well, luckily, my friend Katie Nyberg is on this call, who is the executive director of the Friends Alliance. So Katie, I can't see you on my screen, but I know you're out there, and I hope I do this answer justice to you, and you can rip me in the chat if if I don't nail it. Oh, there you are. Hi, friend. The Friends Alliance is a professional network that supports leaders of philanthropic organizations who are supporting national parks. So they're a membership organization. They are very similar to what Jason is talking about, and the fact that they do something that NPF cannot do and wouldn't do. You know, we in the early days tried to support some of this work, but it became pretty clear that this organization needed to be its own entity. It needed to be revenue generating, and it needed to solely focus on developing leaders in this space as a profession, because this is a profession. Leading a nonprofit organization that supports a national park is a wild ride, and they need a space to collaborate together, to think together, and to provide each other support, and to provide a place to think through things. NPF provided some of that, but the Friends Alliance existed for many, 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 many years without NPF, and was an all volunteer organization, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that it could be so much more. The community needed and deserved so much more. And with the support of Pisces, really providing a catalytic grant opportunity for us to invest really heavily in the Friends Alliance was a lot of that infrastructure that we needed. It also took a lot of dedicated individuals who believed that this was the path to go down, a lot of strong leaders who stuck with this idea and this initiative to support these nonprofit organizations to lift everybody up. Partners are doing more and more for parks every single day. And as those relationships develop and change over time based on the National Park Service, one of the things that we know from our data collection is that partners often are the steady. Park leaders can come and go, policies can change, administrations come and go, but a friends group, a partner, can really maintain a lot of the historical knowledge, a lot of the information on how things function through that partnership and at that park. So as I mentioned, through Pisces, we were able to have a really significant gift to invest in the Friends Alliance for multiple years, doing a lot of great strategy work tied with pretty impressive tactics that we were then able to leverage with other funders. So other foundations saw the brilliance behind this, saw the power of a community, saw the force multiplier that this created, and I think many of you on this call may know that NPF received not too long ago a pretty historic gift, our largest gift ever, $100 million from the Lilly Endowment. And I can say pretty definitively that a funder like Pisces, who is willing to take a chance, and its leadership through Randy Fisher's brilliance and partnership and friendship and just support of this community, was allowed NPF to have an even more robust investment in not only the partner community overall, but in the Friends Alliance. And being able to have frank and very fun conversations with Katie about what is a Friends Alliance role, what is an NPF role, how are we overlapping, and how are we different? You know, at the end of the day, NPF is a granting organization. We receive funds from organizations like Pisces, and we re-grant that out to fit the priorities of NPF and the National Park Service. We're not an on-the-ground program provider. We're not a professional development organization. And so it's been a really interesting ride to kind of figure out the nuances of this arrangement. But I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is the value in which having the both of these organizations exist has lifted the field of partners up so tremendously over the last 10 years. the way that this has changed and grown, and partners are raising more money than ever before. It's most likely over $500 million a year now. And 10 years ago, I don't even know if we could say it was half that much.
Yeah, it's a great example of how an affinity group can raise the capacity of everybody. I want to switch now to talk a little bit about the challenges, because I think a lot of people are here in this webinar because they're engaged in partnership in some level, and they're wondering, could I be unlocking more potential from this partnership, or I'm really struggling with this partnership. What are some of the common pitfalls that you see? And maybe we'll start with Sarah, but Jason, feel free to jump in. I mean, feel free to bat this one back and forth a little bit.
Sure. I shared my own example in the beginning where I was holding back. I wasn't being as forthcoming as perhaps that I could be. And I think a lot of the struggles come down to commitment, not spending time on the partnership, wrong expectations. And I think sometimes some kind of, this one's a little bit awkward, but we might not like each other. There could be a bad personality match. You just don't click. And that is a real thing that I have seen in my years in this work, that sometimes that happens. So how do you think about working beyond that? What value does each individual organization bring to the table? And are you willing to work beyond that and find the path forward? The other thing that I think about and see a bit is, when do you want to call it quits? When isn't it happening anymore? And one of the things that, I don't want to leave us on a bad note. So one of the things that I think NPF has recognized throughout this process is that these things do happen. Not everything is roses. What is our response to that? And I think one of the tactical things that we're working on with Katie and with our colleagues at the National Park Service is thinking about, in what instances do subject matter experts provide some good value to come into these situations, to provide some third-party expertise and perspective, to lift this up, we're calling it lift teams, that's why I'm saying lift. Think about, how do we work through this together? Sometimes you need that third-party person who's been around the block a few times to tell you what you're not seeing or what you don't want to see. And I think that I'm really excited about this Lift Team initiative, because it's not going to solve every single problem. Not everything is a Lift Team problem, but there are a lot of great subject matter experts who've left this field in a well-deserved retirement, or our National Park Service colleagues who have left the agency. They still want to give back. They have a lot to give. And this is an opportunity for them. They know the problems. These are seasoned problems. These are very regular relationship issues. How can they be part of the solution? And so that's kind of something that I'm really looking forward to testing out over the next year. But Jason, what do you have tucked away as a typical failure or a challenge of partnerships?
Well, let me be short. I'd love to hear from everybody else too on the call. I'll just come up with one thing, which is, what have you said no to in order to be in the partnership? If you don't say no to it, it doesn't have a long runway, unfortunately. You're already super full. You're already at 110% already. If you're going to get into a partnership, it's going to take another 10%, and then you're working at 120%. And so what is the value of the partnership in order for you to say this? It is so important for me to partner with this individual or this institution or this alliance or this backbone, that I'm going to say no to something on my list so I can do that, because that thing is going to add more value. The biggest pitfall is burnout over it, that people have to do this on top of all the stuff they already have to do. And so how do you articulate to your executive director, if you're not that person, or to your board, that by being in collaboration and partnership with, organization X is so much more important because it adds this tangible value to our organization and my leadership, that I need to stop doing this other thing, because you can't keep doing all of that stuff. And that's I think the number one pitfall certainly was what how I failed over and over again until I figured out how to articulate that to the powers that be above me, to suggest that I needed to do this because it was so much more important. But you can't just keep adding things on, and partnership and collaboration, they certainly come and go. But they have to be adding real value to you, your leadership, and your organization. And if they're not, you should say no to it. And if they are, you should say no to something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest pitfalls I see is just ending up in a transactional relationship that really traps you in this cycle of meeting the other's needs and limits you from seeing bigger opportunities. So, for example, you have a partner who's really clear about the goals and another partner saying, "Okay, I'll come in and offer this." It comes down to power dynamics, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit. Jason, as someone who is in that power dynamic, how do you recommend people address those power dynamics, or how do you get past them in your collaborations?
It's probably, well, it's not probably, it is the most challenging, I think, part of the job, in part because the ratios are so different. There's one of me, and there's however many organizations seeking grants. And so the alignment process is how we try to kind of work on that. Once we find alignment with a grantee or with a person or an idea, that's kind of the point that tips the scale to really dig in and put the like join the table as opposed to sit adjunct to it. The alignment process is inherently transactional. Sometimes there are things that come across email, things that come over the transom. Often it's relational in that we meet somewhere because we have some mutual interest. We're at a conference or we're at some sort of convening, and the why of the issue starts to surface. I try to do things. First of all, I try to name those dynamics right from the beginning. I understand there's a supply and demand challenge here. And try to be as gracious as possible with the given time constraints. And but it's when we get over that like this rolls over here and that rolls over there, and we're not really allowed to be in relationship with each other, and unless we're in a funding relationship. I kind of reject that. We should be in relationship with each other regardless if we have things in common, and if funding flows, that's great. If it doesn't, maybe I know somebody who could be helpful to the funding piece of the puzzle. But we both have to approach it without the transaction first. We have to approach it with openness, and the challenge is like volume. It's not interest or openness.
Mm. And Sarah, we see this in public-private partnerships too, where, the nonprofit exists to serve this public resource. And so the public resource can sometimes, set the agenda and
Right.
kind of treat the philanthropic partner like an ATM. How do you say, have you seen partners overcome that, or what does it take to overcome that in those partnerships?
Yeah, I think there's some amazing leaders in the Friends community doing some fantastic work. And one of the things that I've seen that's been very successful is when an executive director of a Friends group, philanthropic partner, leads their staff, leads their team as if the park and the partner are the same team. The budget is the same, the goals are the same. We're all in this together for the park. And when that mentality is present, and the superintendent and the executive director of the Friends group sit down and model that type of leadership, and the staff see that, there is so much collaboration and partnership that trickles down, and they feel an agency in which to act that same way. I think about recently retired Debbie Andala at the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley. She is a model of that approach, where although her staff's paycheck would say the Conservancy and the park staff's would be from obviously the agency, the mentality of those two teams together, the way they pooled resources and shared that they were all one. I think my friend Donna at Point Reyes National Park Association has the same mentality. I just visited them in July, and the way that her National Park Service colleagues spoke about the work that they do when they can't do something, that the association is able to step in because they already understand the implications. They've already set the goals. They know when a loss occurs, what that will mean to both organizations. It makes decision-making extremely seamless. And I just want to say something about how Jason framed, Pisces as a partner and as a funder. And as a recipient of funding from the Pisces Foundation, Jason did not pay me to say this, by the way. What I've loved about partnering with them is that over the years, we've really obviously gotten to know one another, and the leadership of our organizations are obviously quite close and strong alignment. But what I've appreciated about how Jason mentioned sitting at the same table and having conversations, having someone like him as a funder for a priority of the organization has meant to me is that he asks really good questions. A great funder will ask amazing questions to push you into directions that you didn't think possible, push you to take some risks, think really big, but also put that partnership first. They know the shared goals, they know what we're all working towards, and just giving that leeway to think really creatively is a real gift. And I think NPF has modeled a lot of our grant making to our partners based on what that relationship with Pisces has developed, how that's developed. We want to extend that to our own funders. So thinking about asking those good questions, how do we be a partner first? And our own new CEO has made it very clear to all of us that it's the partnership first. And funding will come, and that is our goal. But we really want to know what are the successful outcomes for each organization, and let's start there.
We've started dipping into some of the audience questions already, but please keep them coming if you have them. We'll start to transition more squarely there. I have one about joint funding approaches and how maybe Jason, this is a good one for you. How can a partnership kind of demonstrate, that what they're going to do is going to be more than the sum of its parts?
Well, that takes time. There was a comment in there that someone made about the time that it takes, and I just really appreciate that and value that. That is the least transactional part of the whole thing, is a deep understanding of the challenge and the complexity of it, and then the partnership and the collaboration and the roles that it takes to kind of unlock an entrenched system and get some movement on that. That that often doesn't meet the urgency of the need, and I think that's where the dissonance comes in, is that building that shared alignment around a challenge and understanding all the different partners takes time. And so that's why we value these the pieces of movement infrastructure that are already doing that work, that are sorting and selecting priorities. So the big ideas are rising to the top. If we just start from scratch on that, it takes years to get alignment around that. But to the extent that there are conversations already happening in issue areas that a funder is really focused on, that's a way for funders to make that leap much quicker, because they can trust the integrity of the process and the table on a much quicker time frame than if it's just starting from scratch. Now, there was another point that was like, well, what if you have to start from scratch? Well, then you have to articulate what that process is going to look like and why that process will be value fair and yield the big idea. That maybe is the most I don't know, leap of faith part for funders out there, is like to fund a process, and then you basically have to assume that you're going to fund the result of that process if you're going to fund the process itself. Because you can't be like, oh yeah, we'll fund the process, but you only if you come up with this idea will we fund the idea. No, you actually have to be open to what the community surfaces as the priority that they couldn't do individually, that they have to do collectively. that's an area where philanthropy needs to build a lot of muscle, I gotta say. They think about we, not they. We think about these challenges intellectually so often, so long that we think that's a quicker leap. But if a community is just coming together around an emergent issue, it's going to take time to work through the process to build that relationship, to build trust, to surface the shared priority, and then to start working on it. And if you don't have any funding for that, it goes back to what I said earlier, that it's extra on everybody else's job, and it's hard to get to that systemic solution.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit more about that tipping point? We have a question in here. I'd love to hear more about timing. It seems like we need to be building relationships, and then we kind of hope that partnership evolves naturally. There's kind of a courtship, and I'm wondering if you can maybe give an example of when you've seen that courtship kind of tip over into something meaningful, fundable, effective, all the things, who made the first step? What was kind of the case where things came together for a meaningful partnership?
I have a great
Oh,
example of
great.
this, another little story. So there's a friends group out there, won't name names, who, I thought we had a great partnership. And NPF made a misstep. We upset them. And I got a call and was told, I'm mad. This isn't great. I know this isn't your area, Sarah, but I'm coming to you. And at that point, I thought, wow, okay, this is fantastic. Because if we didn't have a great partnership, this person wouldn't have come to me. It could have been ignored, festered, and I wouldn't have known at the end of the day that they were mad at me or mad at NPF or upset with us or all of the things. And I said, thank you so much for letting me know, because now I know we're in this together. Like, now I know we're holding hands, like we're walking down the road, like we got this. And this person was a little surprised because I think they thought that I would have a different reaction. And of course, I did all the other things. I apologized, we figured it out, we, fixed the mistake. But from that point on, it was a true tipping point, and would refer back to that moment as partners to this day, that really showed to both of us how much this meant, because we were willing to speak up about it and have a hard conversation with someone who we funded them often. They are a big time organization, national donors, we share donors, all of the very complicated things that make something like that really hard to do. And our organizations are so much better off for that person having had that conversation with me. And I hope that my relationship building with them, that trust building that we've been talking about this whole time, led to that door being wide open and they just walked through.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a that's like enlightened in so many ways. The challenge to be honest with each other in when all these dynamics are floating around is real. It's so hard. And I've been a grant seeker for much longer in my career than I've been on this side, and it's really hard to tell your funder what's challenging and what's not going right in the work, and even harder to say, hey, and you're not helping with the way that you're behaving. And so like breaking through that, and to my opinion is that it's on the funder to be open to that because of the dynamics, to name that early on in the relationship, to say, look, I'm sure you're going to tell me the wonderful things that go on in your organization, and you should. I need to know that. But I also want to know like where the struggles are, because that's where funding can make a real difference and unlock some progress. I love that example, Sarah.
Thank you. It was hard in the moment, but then.
Yeah.
Mm. We have, further questions about this challenge of funding that non-outcome work, right? Like we all know that it takes all this effort to build these non-transactional relationships. I think, Jason, it feels like you answered it a second ago where you said, well, from my perspective as a funder, like if I'm going to fund your non-outcome work, I'm also kind of committing to fund the outcome, right? Do you see any other barriers to funders funding this work, and or, you know, any case that like things that makes kind of a strong case for funding that work?
Well, yeah, I mean the whole system is the opposite of what we're talking about. I mean
Yeah.
that's the dominant paradigm. And so like how do you break that down? There's some research that's been really influential to me and to our foundation, is some research that the Bridgespan group has done. You can go to Bridgespan or Google Bridgespan field building, I think. And what it starts to articulate is what are the indicators of movements gaining power? What are indications of systems starting to shift? What are indications of fields starting to get stronger? And I see it on our job. And if you look at our blogs or any of the stuff that we post about, it's a lot of this stuff. It's on our job to be arguing to other philanthropy that that this is the type of thing that needs attention. The challenge often is how do you bind that small enough to where you can start to see those indicators in a with a you know, a society that wants instant impact. And it's possible, but it's challenging. And so the building those into partnerships and building those learning and evaluation kind of processes into your partnerships at the early days, even if it's an ethnography. And by that I mean like someone who's cataloging the decisions that you're making along the way, as messy as they are. So you can point back to them and say, hey, if we didn't align on this thing 6 months ago, we wouldn't be here. Our partnership would be, and you start to name those pieces, they start to become visible. Visibility starts to become fundable. Without that, it's just mushy. It's just so hard to get across to somebody else like what these like intermediate steps are. They're not outcomes. They're like indicators of things that are gonna happen in 2 years from now. But we've got to figure out how to articulate those and place value on them. And I think the Bridgespan research is gaining. Mostly, it's pulling from other movements. You know, what did it take to, you know, dramatically reduce smoking in the United States? What did it take to get marriage equality across the finish line? And they start to, you know, like pick out these indicators along the way that these movements, the alignment moments, when various flanks of movements came together around a big idea. And it's really helpful to keep that in your mind as you're forming a partnership. What are those moments along the way that, had they not happened, the partnership would not be effective?
Mm. We've got a question about building an internal culture that is, you know, partnerships oriented, collaboration skilled. Um, Sarah, do you have any observations around this? Because we've talked about when there's sort of one charismatic individual that's carrying all the relationship power, it puts the organization and the partnership in a vulnerable place. So, yeah, what do you see? How do you see this, you know, spreading
Yeah.
those culture practice?
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting at NPF to kind of see how this has evolved. You know, in our mission, there are the words build strategic partnerships. And I always joke that, haha, I have all this job security because I'm in partnerships, and it's right there in the mission. But what I think it really took us to live that out was a couple of things. One, leadership at the very top who believed that, who lived that, who spoke about that, who fundraised around that. All of that was very true. And it took staff and enough resources to create something externally that we could deliver on and show success. I think what really changed the game for us was when I think there was a bit of a, I don't want to say reckoning, that's too much, but just a real understanding that NPF is a granting organization and the impact that we deliver is through and with partners. We fund a lot of things like kids in parks, and I'm not running those programs. We are granting those dollars to organizations who do that. And so how do we shift some mindset of particularly junior staff who may think about programmatic work in one way when truly they're more like a gift officer. You know, that was a real shift over time from 10 years ago to where we are today, and that it continuously happens. And that extends to all different aspects of an organization, from our communications, all of the external, messaging that we do. If we were to put out a message that said NPF built 47,000 miles of trail, did we? Or did our partners, did our grantees? How do we make sure that across the organization, the messaging that we are, what we're putting out externally actually matches who we truly are and how we grant those dollars out the door? And that has been a change over time. It did not happen overnight. It is still something that we're working with. And even now, as I, think about our next fiscal year, this fiscal year 26, what that looks like, one of the things on my plate is to more fully integrate partnerships throughout everything that NPF does. Because more and more we're seeing at this point in time, about 70 to 80% of the grant payments that we put out go to partner organizations. So that means it is absolutely critical that every person at NPF has a partner-centric viewpoint on how we do our work. Do you want to do this webinar again in a year and I can tell you how it went? And it might need 2 years. We talked about culture. We talked about shifting a lot of that. It's an ongoing process. I think about this every single day. I work on this every single day. And it's a joy, absolutely. I told you off the top of the hour how much I love this work, but it is work. And to then change internal culture to match that is a different kind of work as well. But Jason, I'm curious what you think on that one.
I really like that. I guess I would say it's like holding multiple mental models true at the same time, as opposed to having a binary view of things. Using one from philanthropy, there's this thing called trust-based philanthropy, and it has 4 principles to it. And if you don't check each 4 of those boxes, you're not a trust-based philanthropy. And that's really frustrating to me because I don't work for an endowed foundation. There's not a big endowment somewhere that spins off a certain percentage and comes to the Pisces Foundation. We get funded from our donors every 3 years. So I can't do multiple grants over that 3-year or multiple year grants over that 3-year span. And it matters which year the grant comes in. If it's in the 3rd year, it can only be a 1-year grant. So by definition, I cannot be a trust-based philanthropist. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we're going to create these constructs that keep people out, as opposed to creating a mental model that invites people in. And so having a foundation that's willing to be in relationship with their grantees and say, look, we're constrained this year. This is the last year of our funding model, but we get some more funding next year. I'm really excited to talk to you about a multi-year grant. To me, that's more trust-based than just giving a grant that's multi-years and not talking to the grantee. So one of it is like, how can two things be true at the same time? Another piece is the proximity to the challenge. The Sarah stat about like how much of the grant making gets to park partners, I think is really powerful. If the Pisces Foundation was going to try to support individual park partners across the country, it'd be really challenging to be in relationship with 424 of them, or whatever the number is.
Or 70.
There you go. Or 16. But being able to know that the National Park Foundation, in this case, or the Nature Center administrators, or California EE Association, these groups that are in the white space, the middle space of the ecosystem, they are actually much better decision makers for relationship-based work on the ground than I am from my office in San Francisco. I just can't be in relationship with that many. So how do you hold the mental model that says, yes, we care about impact, yes, we care about outputs, but no, we're not actually the person best suited to make that decision about how to make the change on the ground? That often just gets rejected. and so I'm like trying to hold both of those things. Like, how can we be responsible for that, or be responsible grant makers, and allow a more participatory frame to make those decisions than than what I can glean from a value judgment off 400 pieces of paper that get submitted to me. It's just not, it doesn't make any sense. So that's why we have to be in relationship with the ecosystem to understand where those nodes are that are more proximate to the problems that we're working to solve, and then be in relationship with those organizations and trust that decisions can be made at a distance from the foundation and still have the impact that we're seeking.
Mm, That's great. Thank you. Well, we should move things to a close since we're closing in just a minute here. I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you both for sharing your insights. Please get in touch with me to get in touch with these folks after the webinar if you have further questions. I hope you'll follow Patera Group. We do these free webinars once a month. The next one's on communication and collaboration on Teams. So this one will actually be really practical skills about communicating across difference, communicating across cultural difference, making sure your message is heard. And that's with our managing director, Daniel Student. Yeah, stick around. I'm happy to answer questions for a few more minutes, but I will end the recording and let everyone go that needs to go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.